Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Henna Zuberi, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. You are watching us on Muslim Network TV, America's only Muslim focused TV channel. You can always watch Muslim Network TV 24/7 on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and Galaxy 19 satellite. So, today, our topic of discussion is the role of Muslim women in the struggle against apartheid. And to discuss this, and as well as the current Muslim movement in Muslim women's movement in South Africa, is a dear mentor, friend, somebody I really look up to, Sister Shamshad Begum Sayed. I met Sister Shamshad when we invited her under the Afia Foundation to speak, and both Sister Shamshad and I share a love for Sister Afia Siddiqui. And Sister Shamshad had been invited to the United States to speak with then Vice President Biden, who is now President-elect Biden, on the release of Sister Afia Siddiqui. And we spent a bit of time together, alhamdulillah. And from her, I learned the role of Muslim women in the struggle against apartheid. And I didn't know this part of the history, and so I'm so honored and proud to welcome Sister Shamshad all the way from South Africa. Let me tell you a little bit more about her. She has a double honors degree in Islamic Studies and History, and in HED postgraduate. She's also the managing director for Sayed Global Productions and the former head of Women's Affairs at the Human Rights Foundation. She's a founding member of ITV and Dean TV, and she's done a lot of work in education. She's been a formal school principal and is the CEO and spokesperson and the founding member of South African National Muslim Women's Forum. And I'm really excited to talk to her about this because I believe this is the model that they have implemented in South Africa for Muslim women's work is just absolutely fascinating and something that can be replicated in English-speaking countries around the world. So thank you so much for being here, Sister Shamshad, and welcome.
Shukran Jazilan, Assalamu alaikum to you and all the wonderful viewers of Muslim TV Network. Thank you for such a warm welcome. Really honored to be in your presence. I'm actually very nervous because knowing Sister Henna Zuberi and all the work she's done, mine is just like a drop in the ocean. So, Shukran Jazilan, and lovely to share the platform with you once again. You really blew us away with your presentation at our conference, as you rightly said, for the South African National Muslim Women's Forum. Yes, we'd like people to replicate, and women especially to replicate. We're a minority of a minority, here in less than 2% of the population. But we do a lot. We're vociferous, I won't say flamboyant, but yes, we're very, very active. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So I'm going to start and talk to you first about, please share with some of our audience who may not know the history of apartheid in South Africa, and just so we can define the terminology and people understand, especially young activists who may be watching, and our next generation who may be watching, about what was life like under apartheid in South Africa.
It was difficult, it was oppressive, it was brutal. We hear the word apartheid, but I think the genesis of it was here in South Africa. My own experience, if I may just share with you, because you asked me for my personal self, I think you became politically conscious overnight because you were suddenly, apartheid, what it did, it was based on the policy of supremacy. And who was the supremacist? Was the white Afrikaner male. Women, Muslim women in particular, were triply marginalized because the supremacist was Christian as well. So we were not white, we were not men, we were not Christian. We were women, we were Muslim, and we were triply marginalized. But that didn't stop us. All of us very complacent. I think we were very our maybe our parents lived good lives because they had it all. But what apartheid did then, it locked the wealth of the land in hands of a few. And in doing so, it deprived many people of their livelihoods, it deprived people of what they had, the assets, etc. And people had to look at new, novel ways of living. But it also depended on a system of separate development by D.F. Malan when he became the president in 1961. Oh no, just before that, and it was separate development. So politically, educationally, economically, you had to develop in your own race groups, you know. So you had the whites, you had the coloreds, you had the Asians and Indians together. That's Chinese, the whole subcontinent, whether you're Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc. Um, the whole Malay community as well. So, and then you also have the black people. So the idea was if uprisings start, they will start in the black area, they will go to the Indian areas. By the time they reach the colored and the white areas, we'll get them with the brutal force. And this was an occupation that was that brutalized the people with the use of the army and the use of a very brutal police force. And in between that was a lot of secret service societies, something like one would say Mossad or something, but similar to that, you know, like how the Gestapo operated in Germany, very much like that in South Africa. In my own experience, you know, it was devastating because my father, for example, owned cattle. He owned properties. He owned, you know, a huge fleet of taxis, and it because apartheid by legislation, this law and then passed that by law and that municipal law, etc., it sort of took away all that resources and wealth that they had. And he ended up working for a Jewish company.
Mm.
And what hurt me the most was one day, as a transport manager, he had to go and collect the truck that broke down in the Orange Free State, which is now, which everybody knew at the time was the most conservative, most inward looking, most oppressive province at the time,
Mm.
and he needed water. You know, he had to rush out, so needed water. It's quite late, and he came to the window, and he came into the shop to buy a bottle of water, and they said, "Don't you see that you need to go and buy it from that window, that hook? You know, the hook means that little hole there,
Mm.
where blacks and non-whites need to go." And he went there, and when he got there, they closed it. So my dad had to travel all that way back from Orange Free State to Gauteng, which is a huge distance without water. And I think it stirred something in us, you know, the pain to see your father go through that, work so hard, he had so much but lost it all because of the apartheid laws. And for me in particular, when I was in matric, you know, as I said, education also you segregated.
Mhm.
The best education, the best resources, the best facilities went to the whites, and the rest of us, whether you colored, Indian, Asian, or black, you had nothing. You had maybe had a mobile library if you were lucky, but I needed to do a project for my matric exam. What would you call grade 12? I don't know what
Mhm.
levels you call it out there, and I needed so many resources, which I could only get at the proper library in Benoni. I
Mhm.
got to the door and I said, I won't go in. Just give me those books. I'll prepare to pay for it. They said, no, you're not white. You cannot enter. And I remember my
How
brother-in-law who
did
had
you feel at that moment? That is, and that just.
dehumanized, very dehumanized. It was painful. This is the brutality, the pain, the psychological, emotional pain, the scars that it leaves you with that you never get over it. And
Mm.
it makes you a resistance uh, thinker, a resistance speaker. And, you know, it was dangerous for women to get involved in things like that. But the thought and the heart and the feelings remained in that spot, you know.
Mm.
So I remember my brother-in-law who studied in Egypt, and he became pharmacist there. And he said, "Don't worry, I will take you." So I somehow remember getting to the railway, to the station, taking a train to Johannesburg. It was the only multiracial library,
Mm.
and the money, ever money I had, I used for transport, and I had to take those books. And I sat and I wrote. I didn't even have money to photocopy, to take and write and write and write and write. But I passed the trick. So, but the struggle for me really intensified when after, you know, having to experience what my dad went through and having, and then also holidays. We could never go to the sea, to the beach, you know, whites and non-whites.
Mm.
Chairs, benches were demarcated where you can, where you cannot sit, you
Okay.
know. So
I want to ask
psychologically,
you
you're
something,
demonized. Yes.
Shamshad, when you say this, just to clarify this for our audience, when they said colored people, and this is something that the uh, Asians need to realize, because there's a lot of anti-black racism amongst Asians as well.
Yes,
So, and in order to really understand that, either you were white or you were not white. There was
yes,
no, so you were on the
no.
same level, and people need to understand that.
All non-whites were treated with the same disrespect,
Mm,
right? And it also depended in the province you were, it depended in the town you were, it depended. For example, KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, it was known as Port Natal, they were somewhat lenient. I was born in Northern Natal.
mm,
And we needed a permit to come from Northern Natal to Transvaal, it was known as. And it was difficult getting through because you needed a permit. Imagine if there was a funeral. You needed to wait in line at the police station to get a permit to go for a funeral. And if you didn't make it in or out in time, very much like what's happening in Palestine right now,
mm,
it was very difficult. And you then became a criminal. So it criminalized simple acts of living. You became a criminal for being non-white. By mistake, you landed up on a white person's chair. You couldn't marry the whites. If you did, if you fell in love, it was called the Immorality Act. You couldn't
mm,
marry. So all these things totally dehumanize non-whites and blacks and colored and Indians. And in the time of apartheid, we all suffered the same. But obviously, our black brothers suffered. The brothers and sisters suffered the most. And 27 years down the line, not very much has changed for many of them. Poverty is still there, which we'll talk about later. But coming back to the point of apartheid, it was brutal, it was dehumanizing, it robbed you of your senses as well. That you wanted to think straight, you wanted to do the right thing, but overnight you became a criminal
mm,
just for being a different skin color. And this is something that was not natural. It's totally unnatural. And forgive South Africans if they still think in terms of race. It is the indoctrination and the propaganda with which they had to live with and which they had to grow up with. So, just mentioning two or three examples that I have mentioned in my own experience, it gives you a sense of what it was like to
for-
live in apartheid South Africa. And can you imagine in 1994 when we so-called were liberated, the feeling that you could go where you want. COVID has stopped that now, but you could do what you want. You could meet who you want. You could, we have a place in northern suburbs in Johannesburg as well. You couldn't live there under apartheid. It was a
mm,
white area.
mm,
So now you can invest. We have 3, 4 homes, alhamdulillah, because we can now do it. The freedom that we've got in 1994 has allowed us to have that movement, to own things again, to own businesses. I would never been able to own a production company. We would not been able to do the work in the South African National Muslims Forum if we were in apartheid days, because Islam was not recognized as a respect. We were given freedom to worship, but we were not given the same ability to have
mm.
Muslim schools and
This
Muslim
was just 15
organizations.
years ago. This is not like when we're talking about this. This is 20 years in 2020 plus 1996. So that's
1994.
1994. So
Yes.
6 years of that. So this is within,
Goodness.
it's not that, it's a couple of decades ago. And
No, it's just fresh for me in many ways. Sometimes you won't believe me. Sometimes you still have this feeling because there are certain areas in South Africa that are still very white. And if you go into those places, you still get terrible stares, but it's not
mm,
institutionalized racism. It comes
racism.
from within the person, but it's not institutionalized as apartheid was. Apartheid was institutionalized racism, and it became a policy of the government, and it was supported by the United States. I'm sorry to say at the time, but
Exactly.
yes, yeah, I think it was Joe Biden that put up a huge fight when Desmond Tutu visited the US, and he was given quite a bad reception. So he had this huge argument. But all I'm saying, it was hugely dehumanizing. And you felt they wanted you to make inferior to make you feel inferior, and they succeeded
Mm, they fixed
because but what made you a resistance fighter in terms of fighting intellectually? People didn't only fight the armed struggle. There were others that wrote against apartheid. There's, for example, Muslim organizations that did it, Muslim religious organizations, Muslim social scientist organizations, women organizations that wrote against apartheid and spoke out against apartheid, and made it clear that, as one experienced the atrocities of apartheid, it made one into a resistance thinker or resistance fighter or whatever. Like, we have Brother Amit Kathrada, who became a resistance fighter. He's one of the six Ravona trialists, was incarcerated. Mandela's 27 years, he was 26 years in prison. But he put up a stallion fight, against apartheid, and was prepared to take it, the whole journey, so to speak. And I think what was the Achilles heel for apartheid was that we learned. I think one of the things you wanted to ask me is, what are some of the lessons we can learn in fighting
Thank you.
apartheid?
And I'm going to come to the lesson, Sister Shamshad. I wanted you
Yes,
to also, because this was very powerful. I remember you gave a lecture on this when you came to the United
yes,
States. Was the role of Muslim women in that struggle? I
yes.
really wanted, like, and especially since, as you said, you were a minority within a minority, and already Muslim women, especially coming from conservative homes, to stand in the struggle side by side with their brothers. I want you to touch on that, and then we'll move on to some lessons from that movement.
I just want to say at the outset, Sister Hannah, that when it comes to Muslim women founded or took part in various forms of fighting racism or resistance to apartheid, such as trade unionists, some trade unionist movement, or they took part in protest actions, or they took part in charitable activities, which is a very important thing, because
Mm,
if you look at many of the resistance organizations, you start at grassroots level to start addressing to the needs of the community.
mm,
You then win their confidence. And this becomes a major thorn in the side. How many people more are you going to kill? And I'm not talking of just the word kill. I'm really talking of brutally killing people who are
mm,
wanting to do charitable work. So women were engaged a lot of those charitable organizations. During the thick of apartheid in the 1980s, for example, if you look at the drug problem,
mhm,
we saw there's a problem in the Muslim community, and drug the drug problem is not taken to one community. It attacks everybody,
mm,
every race, every color, every creed, every gender, etc. And this is a common problem among all the races. You must know, in 1980s, when went back to teaching, I realized something changed in the 10 years I left school, and now that I'm back as a teacher at the time, was this, in a class of 30 children, 28 were on drugs. How
oh,
did this happen? You know, and we didn't have Muslim schools at the time, so we had to operate within the parameters
mm,
of what was there at the time, which was the House of Delegates, which was the Indian um, part of the governance. And when we try to tell them this is happening, they say, no, Hindu, Muslims, and Indians, we have values. We don't have this problem, try to see it. But it was a problem. That didn't stop us, because in my personal capacity, I then went on to become a SENCA counsel, which is South African National Narcotics and Alcohol Association, became a counselor. And then at a massive school concert, I put out a flyer with the
mm,
types of drugs, how to identify it, what to do, and what help to seek, where to seek that help, and put it on every chair, so that every parent could see if their child was. Because if you told the parent your child's taking drugs, you probably get a hiding. You
yeah,
as a teacher, you have to get a hiding, not the child. So this is one of the ways. But there were other people who did it. For example, Sister Fatima Mir, a great activist of South Africa. She passed away, I think, in 2010. Great friend of Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Both they were incarcerated in 1976. She started raising funds for the Bengali. I think you must have heard about the Great Bengali Famine, and it became a problem. She became a criminal for doing that,
mm,
and that was in Natal, which is supposed to be a very liberal province. And it didn't stop with. She then went on to provide, childcare facilities for all the mothers who work, especially domestic mothers who were black mothers who were supporting, were working. So those are the charitable things. I'll come back to that in point. But I said across racial and religious lines, you found that although there was a divide, but there was this social upliftment or
Mm.
this fight for social equality that the women fought for across the board. So you would find a Muslim woman saying to her community, 40 houses is our paras, right?
Mm.
You cannot go to bed in 40 houses in any direction in your radius, haven't eaten. So
Heaven.
it became a thing that, then we started what was known, like for example, started the International Muslim Girls Committee, Springs Muslim Girls. They've all evolved into women's forums because then we started making sandwiches for the children at school, providing, hampers for the poor, etc.
Mm.
Like, and this continued. It's not a national body, but just one example. But it didn't stop other women like Sister Fatima Mir, for example, who did this. Sharing her meals with the poor,
Mm.
so you find that the fight for
Service.
social justice, and social equality became the anchor from which they diverted the activities. And
Mm.
mind you, they were in prison for it. So
Subhan.
you were not allowed to be in another, this curfew at night. You can't go window shopping in town, for example. And
Mm.
people, one of the lessons is to use privilege. So if you had a white friend, you say, well, call me to your area and we will talk. Meanwhile, you want to you get the assistance, financial, whatever, to assist the poor, which is way down the line, black areas, And we as the Muslim and Indian Asian community is very close to the black community because we were sharing maybe a railway line just separated us, for example, or maybe just a circle or a ring separated two areas. So we're very close to them in the colored community. So yes, the fight for social justice took on many, many forms, and resistance movements then part of it. And there was this great United Democratic Movement that
Mm.
enlisted the support of not only blacks but coloreds, Indians, and this is where a lot of the Muslims had placed them. I found a home and so I must also mention that a lot of the teachings of Satyagraha, of passive resistance by Mahatma Gandhi, also led to many Indians who are not Muslim but Indians to join the resistance campaign. For example, burning their passes and things like that. But lo and behold, I think what is most important is that the we just 1.5 at that time, 1.5% of the population, but we also very not at all homogeneous. The Muslim
Mm.
community in
Very
South Africa is far from homogeneous, and now after 1994, it's even more less homogeneous
nice.
than ever before. But with it, when there is a need for disaster like COVID came, and we had, for example, there's attacks in Syria or Kashmir or something, you find the entire country coming together, Muslims. So this is what unites us. It catapults us into action, just the way apartheid did, because we have it within us to fight for justice, to fight for social justice, not just in South Africa, but throughout the world.
And this is something that
Yes,
had touched me too when in your lecture once you had said this, that because the numbers weren't great. It wasn't like there were multi-millions of you.
yes,
You were small in number, but that did not stop people from doing consistent acts of
yes,
resistance. For example, I remember you shared this example of when people would come in at the airport, maybe celebrities or maybe people, dignitaries from other countries. Then Muslim women would stand, maybe it was even just one or two of them would stand with signs outside the airport. So this.
yes. This happened, especially with the case of the Kashmir issue. If they knew the leader of India was coming, I mean, even if there was one person stand with a placard to say India an occupying force in Kashmir, for example, that one voice made headlines. It attracted mainstream media and other types of media. As I said, 1.5% of the population at that time, maybe now over 2%. But the struggles they took on was core. It was really core. If you look at a person like Sister, what was her name? Khadija Gul
Go.
Christopher. She she realized a social injustice and terrible, terrible legal injustice because there was a white man that raped an Indian girl. He got 9 months in jail.
Mm.
But there was a colored man who raped a white woman and he got a life sentence. And she took this upon as her struggle. And years later, her daughter Julieta took on the struggle for social justice, what you know as political medical fraternity. Because and this is a manifestation you see in HIV/AIDS. It's a socio-economic problem, and that also was classified as a pandemic. It was the poor that suffered because of the lack of immunity. It was the lack of resources, lack of proper medication. So the struggle continued. And if you look further down the line, you will find people like Zainab Asfat, great protester for the cause of women, for the cause of justice, for social justice. She refused to sing the national anthem because she said it doesn't appeal to us. And one woman, one Muslim woman. So I'm just giving you some other examples. Sister Rahima Musa
I'm
for me
absolutely enjoying these examples, and I hope
has,
people learn from them and highlight. Some of these sisters' names doesn't just die out, and that's what we hope to highlight. That
yes,
please go ahead.
I think for me, my personal, I think one of the silent heroines for me was Sister Rahima Musa. She was one of the four women from the Federation of Women who marched in 1956 to the Union buildings to protest against the past laws. You could not, the blacks especially, could not look at the solidarity. The blacks could not walk without their what would you call it in America? We call it your ID or identification
Mhm.
now, or book of life. They could not, and if they were found without the document, they were imprisoned. So these four women, Sister Sister Rahima Musa, Sister Lillian Ngoy, Sister Sophie Williams de Brain, and there was a white lady as well. I'm just trying to get her name. But anyway, she was one of the four of them that walked, to the Union buildings. Thousands and thousands of other women that joined them as well in this, and all of them got arrested. The
Mm.
point I'm making is, as a Muslim woman, she did not step back. One Muslim woman spoke on behalf of all the Muslim women,
Mm.
handed in the passes, and said, we are opposed to and you must know, Pretoria is the capital of South Africa, it's the executive head of South Africa, and they were prepared to get arrested.
Mm.
So and they got arrested, and even the disparity in prison at the time because of apartheid speaks volumes. For example, Helen Joseph, who was the white lady, she had five-star treatment in prison, while Sister Lillian Ngoyi was a black, had to sleep on a mat, and sanitation was unspeakable. So the battle continued at every level where they went. When the resistance started, women continued to hold the banner of social justice and social equality.
And how did
But
they organize? This is something that so at that time that we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have these
yes,
methods.
good question.
How did the sisters organize?
This is like one of the lessons I was going to talk about was telephonically, it was by pamphlets, it was by letters, it was by messengers. So
Mm.
who knows, you might even go back to that kind of communication.
Yeah.
But it was an interaction and an invitation to other groups to say,
Mm.
you be the white wing of fighting resistance. And this was also one of the reasons for the Achilles heel of the apartheid
Mm.
regime, because they didn't expect some whites to become friends of the resistance movement
Mm.
or the anti-apartheid movement, and they did become, because they were educated in it through education, through message, and then when you had I think it was the Freedom Charter. People said, a person like Steve Biko said, we don't want whites or people of color. He was the leader of the Black consciousness movement. But I think while we say leadership must be with the oppressed people, and it rightly must be with the Black people like Mandela, Sisulu, and they were invited to become part of this. They were both very high profile lawyers. And they made it clear that, everybody needs to become part of the sort of globalize the struggle and not nationalize the struggle in the South African context. Because if you were stuck in your own racist area, in your own group area, there was no real interaction. But with an invitation to, as lawyers using the position of privilege, they could get then their fellow white colleagues who were lawyers, for example, to think about. And then one of them was Bram Fischer, who was then also, he became an anti-apartheid activist. White, he was ostracized by his white community, but carried
Mm.
on the fight, and he was actually became the lawyer for Mandela when he was on trial, and he missed Mandela missed the death sentence by a hair's breadth. Brown Fisher managed to get him and Ahmed Kathrad and four others
Mhm.
into a life sentence, which they served 26 and 27 years respectively. And yes, and Ram Fisher himself was put into prison for life because of his fight against apartheid. But it just shows that,
So,
that interaction. People like, for example, Rahima Musa was, I think she was not mistaken, a nurse, and there's a hospital named after her. So they use their positions, to
and
talk about what is going on with their colleagues in their workplaces, etc. And it was much more than what I'm saying. I'm just
so
giving you
not
the tip of the
living in the
iceberg.
bubble. So that's one of the lessons that I can gather from what you're saying. One was educating people about what was happening.
Yes.
Two, getting allies from the oppressor's community.
Yes,
So this is
that's
something.
excellent. Yes, and that is exactly the foundation of the thought process
Mm.
of when the ANC Youth League, in fact, when they want, when these in the work, they moved on to the armed struggle. But the thought process was such that we need to, and this didn't only stay there nationally; it also went global,
Mm.
because we went to Africa, and I think Ethiopia was at the helm of alerting Africa to what is going, because South Africa was the tip of Africa.
Mm.
And here we had our backs to the sea. We're not going to go anywhere. We couldn't go like refugees to any other country. We were going to stand and fight.
Mm.
And we needed the support of Africa, our African brothers, which they gallantly came to the rescue for. We needed the support of the world, which was done with the anti-apartheid movement, the boycotts and sanctions movement, which worked
Yes.
phenomenally great. And this alerted the world, especially, I just want to come back to the Women's March
Mhm.
in 1956 to the Union Building. I always say, and as a historian, I feel, scholar, trying to be this historian, because I got my honors in it and I was registered my MA, but things change so quickly overnight. My point is, this was like a precursor to the Sharpeville, which was in 1961,
Mm.
when males and females together went to hand in their passes at the police station at Sharpeville, and the Sharpeville massacre.
Mhm.
Uh, Attracted world attention, and that led to the armed struggle, and then also in 1976 riots, which was from there it was non-stop world attention on South Africa, because international media descended onto the shores and reported like it is. And they risked their lives as well. Journalists, give credit to them as well for showing exactly the brutalities in the townships. So I don't blame Steve Biko for saying we must be careful. The blacks must be careful of the whites, but because they wanted to only work in their own areas, in the black townships, and be treated as heroes when they walked into the townships. But Steve Biko wanted them to work in their plush suburbs, and tell their communities, you're living in luxury. What about sharing the resources with your black and non-white compatriots? And this is one of the lessons also that we should learn. And this is what the women were doing. There's a much more interaction between women than there were men. For
Mm.
some reason, the men were always watched, but women had to go and work, and somewhat skipped under the radar. And there
Mhm.
was a lot of communication, but they did use the media whatever they could. Even if it was not South African media, they did use international media through letters, communication, through friends, through family, etc. So many of them, and a lot of people skipped the country. Oliver Tambo being one of them. My dad was a taxi driver, owned some taxis, and he'd actually been, instrumental trying to get some of them across. And yeah, so yeah, as they went into exile, they then told the story in Africa, and they told the story in the world. Like Amit Kader Asmal went to the UK,
Mhm.
and others went to Ireland, others went to Scotland, others went to the United States, others went to Germany. So I think the exiles, and all this together
Mhm.
gelled. And I'm no expert on the apartheid this thing, but
Mhm.
I think if you can tell your listeners or your viewers, to Google the apartheid museum.
Mm.
It has a lot of artifacts about the actual resistance, as well as the apartheid struggle, as well as, and if you are in South Africa, visit it, because it's a place that you cannot miss. you should see what it was like to live under apartheid with the artifacts that are there and the write-ups, etc. So, but I just also wanted to mention one or two other names. Amina Kachalia, the Kachalia family were in the forefront of
Mm,
the apartheid struggle as well. Naledi Pendo is now the Minister of International Relations.
mm,
A proud history of resistance as well. So it shows what Muslim women, the power, and she's in a very powerful position right now. You had others like Rabia Mutala, and her dad got married, I think at the age of 16.
mm,
And then she married a person called Chota, and then he realized she wanted to study.
mm,
And she continued her studies and continued to resist through her writings, etc. She became the first ambassador to Morocco under Mandela. So
mm,
it did take them places, but I think for me, Fatima Mir stands out. She had an Indian father, Portuguese Jewish mother, but her struggle, with charity and social upliftment, I think it was like it's something in the tradition of the wives of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. When they wanted opulence, there wasn't a verse, and for 29 days, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam left the women, his wives, and the verse came down: if you want opulence, you can be divorced. You should do social upliftment. Every single wife of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam chose social upliftment. So women are resourceful and they used their talents
mm,
in South Africa as well. Not just to multitask, but also to use whatever was out there, the little abilities and capabilities and legalities they used, and they spun it to be able to uplift society. And then it became more vociferous and dynamic. And it became sort of, and the Muslim women, they don't ever go to the media and say, I did this and I did that.
mm,
Really. Some may. But even in those days, like my granny, she used to every Monday make sure that all the poor people were out and she'd feed them. And every Thursday, every Monday she'd give out all clothes and every Thursday she'd feed them. And we know that Islamically your deeds are taken into account on a Monday and Thursday. So imagine getting your record written and she passed you on a Friday. So, Alhamdulillah, I think the struggle
And
within
see,
Muslim women
what
has
I'm hearing
always been there.
from what I'm hearing from you is that sometimes we think of these grand activists, especially these days, these celebrity activists that are at the front line and they're at the protests. And a lot of times we don't realize that that is just one part of a resistance movement.
Mm.
Being at home, just like your grandmother, or just like some of the sisters that you're talking about, you can be a part of the resistance in whatever capacity you are in. And that is a lesson that I'm, garnering from the work of the women in South Africa. I really want to talk a little bit about the work. What is going on now? What is the status of Muslim women in South Africa now? What are some of the challenges? And I know you have started a media company that is taking on some of these challenges that the Muslim women in South Africa are facing.
As I said, years ago in the 80s, and if you look at my grandparents, 50s, 40s, from the time they came, I must say it's 16th of November today. It's exactly 160 years since the Indians arrived in South Africa. So it's 160 years because they came in 1820. And the Malays, who predominantly in Cape Town, they came way back in the 17th century. So can you hear me, Sister Hina? Can you hear me, Sister Hina?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, fine. I just thought I lost you for a while. So yes, so this activism I think is innate in Muslim women to serve and to serve not just their families but their communities, because as Islam says, you need to see to 40 houses in your vicinity. And I think the example was set for many of us. But apartheid stirred us, it created a political consciousness as well, that it's not just work, it's much more work that we need to do now, because much more people are oppressed, much more people are starving, etc. But I think in the context of South Africa, we're facing two serious problems. There are many, but the two main ones is poverty, hunger, and gender-based violence. I think gender-based violence is actually called the real pandemic in South Africa, and it got even worse under lockdown. But I just want to say for example, the South African Muslim Women's Forum, we were working individually in our own towns and provinces. Like I was in Natal, and Sister Hawa was in Roshni, and Sister Hajra was, for example, in Potchefstroom in another province. It just so happened that we just, the networking started. I was doing Northern Natal from Newcastle, Danhauser, Dundee, Colenso, Escort, Ladysmith, etc. And Sister Hawa was doing it here in Roshni with all the other towns and village towns around her. And we met in 1998, and where we started then forming the national body, because we said, there was, as I said, South Africa is not a homogeneous community. And there was some ladies who wanted to use Muslim women's work to say, they work under us, and they were a political organization. And we said, no, we an essentially Muslim organization doing social upliftment to please the Almighty in accordance with the teachings of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, without having to waver in our duties. And we want to be with, women of like minds who are already there, but just to form an umbrella organization. And we were then encouraged by several ulama, one being the late Maulana Yusuf Patel, who's now buried in Makkah al-Mukarramah, as well as the Maulana Abbas Jinnah, who is the head of the Jamiat Ulama South Africa, and quite a lot of other well-wishers, politicians, and quite a few of them, quite a few organizations. So we then formed a national board, like an umbrella organization, and much of the work that's being done by forums on a daily basis, we don't take credit for. We do come together for major things, and we club together our resources. Goes no use each one doing it themselves when we pull our resources together. A case of which in 2017 we raised over 1.5 million rand for the Syrian refugees. It was really bad at the time. And we did the similar. We had a Kashmir conference, for example, when it was 60 years, under occupation. We said we cannot let just this go by unnoticed. We want to do something. So we gave a certificate, and there's a certificate here, to show that whoever took part, you gave them a certificate to say they took part in a Kashmir. It was in association with ITV at the time. They took part in this conference where Rahima Musa's daughter was the guest of honor. So Alhamdulillah, and it was a seminar that alerted them. Then we also got involved in the BDS campaign for Palestine, etc. And the other thing that we did Islamic inheritance for women, I don't know if you can see that, and gave them certificates to say, what, we educationally, emotionally, politically, socially, financially enhancing women. So every year we've had this annual conference of women, which you were part of this year, empowerment conference for youth and sisters, because youth is our target, their future. So to get them, how did it start, Sister Hina? It's amazing, because we realized one of our chairs, we have 200 and some odd chairs more and growing by the day. And one of the chairs' husband passed away, and lo and behold, she didn't even know how to access husband's account for bread and milk. And we said, no, we cannot let this happen. So we got in the big guns, the captains of the industry. We got in banks, Islamic banks. We had a seminar, and we spoke about financial empowerment, emotional empowerment, mental empowerment. And then it just evolved, because then we looked at the needs from one year to the next, and took resolutions and said, we will not move forward until we implemented the resolutions of the previous conference or seminar. It evolved into a conference, and we had people like Sister Yvonne Ridley, all of them come and be guests, and great South Africans. Sister Nolusapo Mandela, who's the mother of Mr. Mandela Mandela from the Royal House of Mandela,
And you know what?
grace us.
One of the things that really, really impresses me about your work is that it is not run by another organization where the
No.
women section is sort of like, oh, this is the sisters part of the organization. This is
No,
it is
this is the genesis.
grassroots.
The
Yeah,
genesis of it was women,
yeah,
and we're not going to talk of nemesis. There's no nemesis. It's going to continue.
yeah.
And the genesis of was purely woman grown,
Mm.
but we did get guidance from the ulama and scholars, whether they were professors or whether the ulama, or because we have friends in both camps, or three whatever camps, that said, your work is so good, But we remain under the radar. There's a reason for it. Islamically, you know what the right hand does, the left hand mustn't know. Many firms don't want to go into the limelight because sometimes it's of a sensitive nature.
Mm.
When, for example, a woman's husband has deserted her and she's abused, she needs to be kept private and safe. So many cases like that, many cases like that. We're sitting with the pandemic of gender-based violence in South Africa, and Muslim women included. And the good thing about this, mentioned that we're homegrown women, we also Muslim women who work with all the races, especially our black community, our
Mm.
African brothers and sisters. That's where the bulk of our social upliftment is, and Allah is the judge today.
That's right.
While we do come together for global humanitarian crisis, man-made or natural, the other annual event we also have the Kira Jalsa. And Sister Hena, I don't know if you know this, but this is the day we're just going to have our 10th one in a few months. And this is in commemoration of Sister Afia, Hafiza Alima Afia Siddiqui, who lived and loved the Quran. So we commemorate her and we use our political freedom, our democratic right to voice our opinion, to claim her, or to claim for her freedom, or fight for her. And we pray for her every day. We hosted Sister Fawzia Siddiqui twice.
Mm.
And we raised considerable sum for her court cases, which we hoped would make some difference, but Allah knows. And, we're also very involved in orphanages, old age homes, secure homes for women, abused women, schools, hospitals. We built a clinic in Pakistan during the floods
Mm.
on the border where there was a flood, so you'll find it called Mandela
Political
Clinic.
advocacy. Do you all do political advocacy as well?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Do you do political advocacy as well?
Yes, when it comes to Kashmir, when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to Syria, when it comes to Burma, when it comes to the Rohingya situation, we join with other NGOs, humanitarian organizations. We have taken part in a fair amount of protests for Sister Afia Siddiqui. We handed a memorandum in 2012 to the American Embassy,
Mm.
the main American embassy here in Johannesburg, and we took center stage because we occupied the main road that leads to and from
I've
this
seen
the mall.
that's
Yes, and we've got all that on video. I should have shared some of those video clippings. I can still send it to you. And we then handed a memorandum over, and I was just afraid. I was coming to the US by invitation, and I was worried because they know my name is linked. I was the woman to represent the delegation there. Would they allow me? And they said there was no problem. And people were worried because Trump was just inaugurated. And I said, don't worry, he won't trouble Muslims. And I don't think he did. So we just must have hope. We must be brave. You see, what apartheid also did for me and for many women was that it just made us strong.
mm.
When the women marched to Pretoria in 1956, they told Malan and his government, strike a woman, you strike a rock.
Mm.
And this has become the logo. It has become, the saying and the call of women throughout South Africa: strike a woman, you strike a rock.
Rock.
So your laws don't apply to us. We women, we're created by the Almighty, and we will fight. We've lost sons, we've lost husbands, we have family, we have lost community members, and we've seen others lose. We've seen our friends being tortured, nails ripped off, and electrocuted, etc. We've seen Steve Biko's body. We know, and it doesn't make us scared. If anything, it made us very strong,
Stronger.
and it
One
made.
before I know we're wrapping up the hour. One question I did want to ask about the organizing. So, how do you do it according to province? Is there a forum in each province, and then the forums connect annually?
There's a forum in every town, in every province, and we have a WhatsApp. Hey, WhatsApp, the technology has made it very easy for us to communicate, and we do communicate through WhatsApp on a daily basis.
Hmm.
Who's doing what? Right now, we're running a bread project, and it's so easy. It's like 7 rand, which is less than $1. To contribute for a family, to buy bread, etc. So all that now they replicate. So what we do is, our motto is enjoying what is good and forbid what is evil, and what we do is replicate. One of the beautiful things, and many of our domestic workers are of the Black indigenous group. So what we do is once a year we give them a luncheon in the various nights. It started in Middleburg. It's now being replicated in all the provinces and all the towns. You know, all the forums are doing that. So they had the workers union, domestic workers luncheon, and then now we started this bread project, and that's being replicated. But we come together as a whole, whether it is online or physically, to do work like the conference and seminars and the Kirat Jalsa in the name of the Staff FTK, which we join with Al Tawheed Islamic Center, which is a Dawa oriented organization. And we've worked with major NGOs like Al Imdad, Gift of the Givers, which I'm sure you know, Imtiaz Suleiman. And we've worked with a range of other international and local organizations to be able to see to the needs of the global, national, and local communities. Local social upliftment continues unabated as we speak, round the clock, and the global ones as the need arises. So we're quite involved in the pandemic because we, you know, in Mili Meal project we were part of, which was Muslim Youth Forum started it, and we joined forces with them, which is a youth organization. It became a very popular one because Mili Meal is a staple diet, it's like corn flour. It's very staple to the diet of the people in South Africa. We also joined now with the Amit Kasrada Foundation, where it's called the CAN project, when it seeds to the basic needs and necessities of the communities. You know, it's very organized. So there's a lot more we can talk about, but just for the you know, we're busy with clothing distribution, and now's the time to part with it because you don't need to rest to go anywhere. So we sharing and
have impacted the work, and I think that it must have amplified the work that you all have been doing.
it has amplified the work, and it shows the position in women in society, much as they are the victims of social gender-based violence. And there's a lot of social, emotional, financial, mental abuse,
Mhm.
especially I think under the lockdown. We saw a lot of that. But it doesn't stop the strength of women to come into the fore. Apartheid couldn't break us, this won't break us, but it does need our a divided attention to deal with it. And I think the larger community has already approached the president. We have never went to the president, God recognize our work. If he
Yeah.
doesn't know it, but it doesn't matter because we're doing the work every day for the
And
government, and
it's
and doing.
it's for God, right? So it
Yes,
doesn't
and
matter.
Amit Katrada Foundation knows they fall on us now, you know. So as I said, you know, our work is not. It started off as social upliftment and social justice, but this is the powerful, powerful wing of any resistance movement. If you studied Hamas as well, you will see that they came to the power because started with social upliftment. If you looked at any other liberation movements, it's how they started. If you want to win a struggle, see to the poor,
See to the
empower them, empower the underprivileged, empower the masses, become their friend. And this is what politicians do election time, but we do it every day and win their trust and confidence, not because we want anything, because in the hereafter we can say to our Maker, we as women, your prize creation, O Almighty Allah, we tried our best. You accepted from us with the intention of social upliftment for your pleasure. You know, say service to Allah is actually service to humanity and to His
humanity.
creatures. When we involved also in saving the environment, you know, we quite involved in. We had the youth conference last year where we made the children made outfits, wedding outfits, all included with, you know, recycled material, and they were stunning, absolutely stunning. So we stop at nothing to do what we have to do, uplift our communities. We're a group of very dedicated women. We don't take credit for the work we've been doing out there in the forums. There are many, and there's competition to get, you know, and we must always compete for the good. We should never keep it to ourselves. We should
Subhanallah.
compete with each other to
It's
do
so
good and join what is good.
inspiring to
Yes, and,
hear the way
and
that you all work in
yes.
competition, but as a unit.
Yes, as
SubhanAllah.
in, and Allah and Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Sister Hina, I can only say Allah has blessed us with so much of muhabbah. That
Mm.
we have so much of muhabbah that we have to put out a call, like the one sister put it out in Springs, and she is a divorced single mother. And she said, you know, I'm seeing my community. She lives a few blocks down me, and she said, people are starving, Appa. I need to really get them some, you know, let's do this. And I said, you started our pan for it, and she
Mm.
started it, and now all other towns are replicating it. So
Replicate.
never underestimate your sincere thoughts, and never think that a small action can bring so much of, you know, good globally just by you starting something good, you know, enjoying the good. forbid the evil, and we do fight. Yes, we fight against injustice. We fight by doing the good. We fight by bringing relief. So, and we're also in the process of educating women, not just as far as gender-based violence, not just to give them relief, but also to fight back. The law in South Africa, alhamdulillah, is very, very pro-woman right now. So they need to know their legal position, and that's the struggle we're fighting right now, is to make them understand through workshops, online workshops, etc., to say, these are your rights. You need to fight for these rights. You need to know your position. Why are you taking the abuse? Why do you keep spending money on court interdicts when your legal right is that you shouldn't be abusing by any stand? Why are you begging for money when your husband should be maintaining you and the children? And so these are the legal rights that we are trying to make them understand. So it's not just giving them the fish, but also teaching them how to fish, making them strong in their own right, because some women are timid, perhaps the upbringing, and I don't think Islam tells you to be weak, because if you look at our famous personalities, Hazrat Khadija wasn't weak. I mean, she took
Exactly.
the boycott for 2 years, and she gave all her wealth to her husband because he was Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yes.
She made him the leader of the empire, of her empire, to use for the cause of Islam. And if we have a Muhammad, there's nothing we won't do, for our men. But if you're going to treat your wife less than an animal, then expect a lioness to come to the fore. So
Exactly.
this is what we say to women:
Thank you
you
so
have it
much.
within you.
It was really good seeing you too. And I know we're running out of time. I'm getting messages from our team, but thank you so much for being here and all these gems that you've shared with us. And I really hope that the sisters in Canada and the United States, even in Mexico, who are listening, will learn from the lessons from our sisters in South Africa and get to work. Don't mess with the
Inshallah.
lionesses, don't mess with the raw.
Don't miss the line.
Of the ummah. Jazakallah khair.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. And thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. And this Saturday, we hope to see you again. We're having our annual benefit. Justice for All invites everybody to loving the Ummah, just like our sisters are loving the Ummah in South Africa. November 21st, Saturday at noon CST. So thank you all for joining. Assalamu alaikum.